All right, sorry for the delay, everyone, having some technical difficulties over here. It is 4:11 on, what day is it? Monday, August the 28th. So we'll officially call this special board meeting to order. Thank you, Director Bobajak, for the comment there, go Storm. Even though we didn't have to the playoffs yesterday, I mean, we had no chance, but that's okay, next time. Anyway, really excited to be kind of kicking off the year and are continuing our race and equity work with you all. So yeah, take it away. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having us. I'm going to try to put the slide deck up here, but I think I probably should be sharing my screen. How about that? See what happens. It's all good. I'm trying to share it, so I want to share this here too. So. I don't know if I'm able to get their faces on here.
I mean, unless you don't want to show the screen, do they all have it?
I think so. Yeah.
So then maybe we could keep their faces on and you could look on my deck. I have the deck up.
Okay. We're gonna get started really soon. Fun tech day. And I'm like, where did my thing go? It disappeared on us.
Okay. Great, right. So everyone has the deck. Everyone can see the deck. And we're happy to have two folks joining us via Zoom. We wanted to begin, and thank you for board members taking this time to have this extra board meeting with us. We have been doing some work all year, as you know, and as you recall. Chris got it. Look, I'm so proud of you. All right. And so we wanted to sort of close out this particular section, thinking about how we lead district-wide anti-racism. And so we thought we'd cut some headlines from what's happening in our nation right now. This notion of Florida banning AP African American Studies, the notion of Arkansas saying that even if you took AP American Studies, it won't count towards graduation. Board members having some folks respond to them negatively. And then this notion about, and I love this Ed post, like this thought around what's so scary about teaching realities, racial realities in schools. And so we just wanted to sort of have a quick conversation about what are some of your thoughts as this is happening all around us. And yet maybe you personally haven't experienced backlash, but it's coming. Like if you haven't, it's definitely on its way. And so, you know, what are our thoughts around our response as Tukwila to some of the things that are happening in our nation's, in our nation right now?
Mm-hmm.
And I forgot to look at the Zoom too. So what are some of our thoughts?
About how we would respond, or just any thoughts.
What's our response? We should be prepared. We should be prepared for a response so that we don't have to be shocked.
Yeah.
Right?
I think it's hard for us to imagine having this kind of response.
Yeah.
Because I find it, yeah.
I think there's I can understand that for sure, because I think there's an element of we are so like overshadowed by big districts that are making really, I think a lot more not a lot more, their decisions are just a lot more under a microscope
Hmm.
So I think in a
Mhm.
sense, like if it
Definitely.
has felt that, and which is I think why we haven't gotten much of this so far, is because I think we've been in a sense shielded, but I mean, I don't think I'm necessarily naive in thinking that it wasn't, and it gonna come and won't, yeah, I would be prepared for that. I think for me, my initial thoughts is just like really wanting to continue to try and be as bold in our response as we are with our actions that we're doing that might get those responses. I don't know what that means, but
Mhm.
that's why I go first.
Right, I hear being bold in actions, yeah. Others?
There's a chat. I'm careful with
Right.
where I travel, give my dollars and what companies I support, right?
No, I definitely hear that. And as board members, perhaps being, not being reactive, but proactive is one way that we don't have to wait until someone goes, well, why are we teaching that, right? That we're already preparing for what will probably show up.
There's in Oklahoma, there's a new state superintendent, if you haven't heard, just yet another state that's making the news now in this conversation. Happened to recently, you know, I was just reading about it yesterday. It's like, wait, another, you know, yet another example I could have put up on here, right? And state is essentially trying to take over a number of the school districts, Tulsa in particular, and in part around this exact framing of y'all have been doing this anti-racist work and using that exact language. And a number of the board members were essentially just like, I was totally unprepared for this. Like, we did not think this was going to happen. Right, we're doing good on our assessments, we're doing good on the things that we're supposed to be measuring us on, right? So that I was also thinking about it, right? Not just the proactive piece, but we also don't know what level it will come from, right? Or which, right? So there's multiple, there's political levels, but there's also groundswell of right, the seemingly random but very well organized, like you're right, community voices, right?
So what does proactiveness look like when we're thinking about?
Mhm.
What do you?
I'm so glad you asked that question.
Mhm.
Let's go to our next slide because we're gonna be talking about that today. Exactly. It's almost as if somebody looked at the slide deck.
Didn't actually to look up.
Oh, okay. So before we get into that, just, this is our land, labor, and body acknowledgement all in one, right? That we acknowledge that we live and work on unceded ancestral land of numerous Coast Salish nations, and we recognize the ongoing displacement of Indigenous peoples, and we respect that, right, past and present. But then we also further acknowledge that the burden of environmental exploitation and systemic injustice falls upon the labor of Black and brown bodies in the building of this country and its institutions. So therefore, we remember that Black and brown people were born and died working this land against their will for generations. We also acknowledge the continued contribution of the labor of survivors over the centuries today of all immigrant labor, including voluntary and involuntary traffic, forced and undocumented peoples in the building of what we now call and refer to as the United States. We're so, when we're writing these, we're so serious. But just really wanting to acknowledge, right, always, I love that the Washington area continues to acknowledge Indigenous folks who are indigenous to this land, and also wanting to acknowledge the labor of Black and brown bodies, I think is so critically important. Yes, ma'am.
Question, I want to ask a
Mhm.
question, this is the conversation. I was having a conversation with a friend of mine who is, manager, director of native programming, and so this topic came up of the labor acknowledgement with
Totally.
the land acknowledgement. And from her understanding that what she has shared with me is that some of the tribal groups wanted to actually, they're not against land and labor acknowledgements, but they're thinking that they're separate entities.
Mhm.
And how do we So how do we inform our practice from our tribal, especially when we're part of federally recognized tribes? How do we take that information or actually do a check-in with our tribal
Yep.
groups to see how they would like us to move forward, right? Because we're having that conversation, and so I thought, oh, that was interesting, that was new information for me.
Yep.
So I thought, okay, I was just gonna bring that up in a conversation with the board because we're still talking about this and thought, okay, that would be something that we should probably do is check in with some of the tribal groups and find out. What they said to me was they didn't mind them having them set in the same meeting, but in separate points of a meeting. Is what-
Separate points or separate slides?
Separate slides and separate times, like.
So not one right after the other.
Not like,
Right.
like they're both need to be honored in their own individual way.
Okay,
Having them both on, that's what I heard from.
Yeah.
my Colleagues, former colleagues, so.
yeah. I mean, we did used to do it on separate slides, just to be absolutely transparent. We were just trying to make smaller slides.
Yeah.
I mean, I just wanted, not
Right.
dishonoring one or the other, but it was like, oh my God, we have so many slides. Can we truncate it onto one slide? And I want to both honor and wonder, for me, the labor that, because, you know, transparently, I wrote it and Chris did a lot of editing. The labor of Black and brown bodies in this country, to me, is as important as the ongoing displacement of Indigenous peoples. And so while we're acknowledging, just from a standpoint of how we run a training or a meeting, it would seem that we would do the acknowledgements at the
Right.
same time, because that happens at the beginning of meetings. And I don't want to have to choose one or over the other, frankly. And that's why I try and do them to show that
Right.
we are both acknowledging this and we're acknowledging that.
I mean, what I appreciate, and thanks for raising that, is, I mean, if a district, for example, is going to open regular or public or some kind of, right, meeting sessions, we do this at universities all the time as well, K-12. Right, it's often done as very performative, right? So to open up conversation with, how does this sit with, right? And it's hard because, of course, any tribal communities also doesn't all agree.
Yeah,
Right, so, right, so, but I think that opening up the relationship and the conversation, right, that alone hasn't typically been happening.
well, I would just say that I agree with you, some tribal groups might think this is completely fine.
Right.
Just making sure that we check. is
Completely,
What I was.
completely,
Because if we're gonna actually do land acknowledgements, I wanna make sure that the land we're actually sitting on.
Right,
Those
that's right.
groups actually have a voice
that's right,
in how we do that.
that's right.
And they're very eager to work with us.
Yeah.
In establishing that conversation.
I think that's wonderful. And I guess my only pushback is, and who are we checking in with?
Mhm.
The Black and brown labor people to make sure that they also
Yeah.
feel like they're being acknowledged too. So just, you know, this starts to go
Yeah.
as we're checking, right? It is very, very important to me to acknowledge specifically voluntary and involuntary traffic and forced and undocumented peoples as we look at the building of the land. Like, so I'm like, should we, if we're gonna check with folks, I want to have a representative
folks.
sampling of people who are also being like, yes, you need to acknowledge that my mother, my aunt, my whomever, right, was undocumented and or trafficked. This is a huge piece that we don't often recognize in the labor part of it. So I just
Right.
want to have a both and.
Mhm. And how do we use these opportunities to,
Mhm.
as foundations for some
Deepen.
of these, for the relationships deeper, right? So that it's not a statement. But how do we actually have relationships? Right,
So moving forward, would you
For sure.
like, when we're in meetings so far, to just put those on two separate slides?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah,
So we can
that's-
definitely do that. I would ask that we do those back to back. Okay, so I can do that for Wednesday.
Mhm.
We need to.
Mhm.
that
Yeah, we
change.
can change that.
Okay.
Yep.
Cool. I love that conversation. So we thought we would be like, so who's here? And just talk about what ways did I say perfectly? In what ways are we trying to, that was.
No one's claiming that.
Wrong place.
Right, me too.
White supremacy culture just be lingering in our.
Right, that's the problem. I'm like, it's perfection. So just, your name and what ways are you decentering your pronouns and what ways are you decentering whiteness in your own personal life?
And we put as a to either question, but that's false.
Anyone can go and then they can call on the next person. Oh,
We can fix it.
we sure can. We're doing the teacher wait time.
All right, I'll go. This isn't gonna be a perfect answer.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I don't know why. I'm so sorry.
Carly Hoover, they them pronouns. I mean, it's probably a little bit of a cop out, so I apologize, but I think I'm decentering whiteness by continuing to just push and ask myself the questions, right? And I think by every opportunity I get is stopping and even asking myself, how am I centering myself? How am I centering others? So I think just being really aware
Yeah.
in small things and larger things.
Yeah.
Um,
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you. Call on someone.
Director Bolger?
Dan Bullerjack, she, her.
Hold on a second, can't hear.
Okay.
You can't-
I don't know. I know, where's the speaker on that?
Now, can you hear me?
This is the fun part.
We could have all been on Zoom and it would have been okay.
I know.
Hello, hello.
I love that we
hello.
just assumed we were gonna be able to hear, or at least I did. Yeah, it looks like the audio is good.
How about is your volume up? Let's try. it.
It's not even letting me touch it. So that might be a problem.
I could sing It's a
Like for
Small
real.
World.
It's on, so does this has speakers right there. Mine is set up on those.
Can you hear me now?
Maybe.
Oh, that's why that.
Of course, nobody's talking right now. Director
I-
Bullitt, can you?
I
Okay.
can be talking, or
Still
can you
can't
hear me now?
So I can also try
Oh,
my,
wait. This is a smart board, right?
yeah, I just turned my,
Oh, that's your computer. that's
Yeah.
not the thing.
yeah, that's what that's. Exactly, but I appreciate that. We're gonna do the monitor again and see. If I just needed to undo it.
You could probably change the output of the click on that little arrow right there. And then do PC monitor. Okay. Jan, could you try to do something over there?
Would you like me to talk? Is that what you're
Mm.
saying? Now are you
Okay,
hearing me?
so let's try,
Oh, well.
let's do same as, I mean, that shouldn't change anything. Well, let's try my speakers and then let me. Put both of them on there. Okay. Jan, can you try one more time?
Now can you hear me?
We can.
Wow.
Only on my computer, but that's, we'll take you any way we can get you.
I was gonna sing It's a Small World anyway, because I just got back from Disneyland and that was a good reminder for me of, even though we think it's a big world, it's really not. So she, her, I forgot what I was gonna say. Oh, I was gonna say that I'm working harder on whose voice is being listened to. I have 180 non-English speakers living here, and it's just really fun to figure out how to pull all those voices into the room when I don't understand any of them. So, and making sure that their needs are being recognized and that they're not just having to live my way because I have power. So, that's where I am right now. And I'll call on Dave, because Dave, I don't know how you gave me COVID virtually, but
Wow.
They'll take that day.
Yeah, I don't think that's possible, but
you sure? Okay.
um Dave Larson, he, him, as far as decentering whiteness. So I'm trying to intentionally in a lot of the work, I'm working a lot recently on what I think is called in some books the macro view of education, and particularly in this state our regressive funding system. And I'm working to get our students' voice involved in all that work. And so, and some other kind of things I've been looking at is the issue of guns in our region and how we can, again, get the student voice involved in all of that and drive kind of how we move forward in a lot of those different areas. So
Thank you.
Calling someone?
Are we talking at the same time?
Okay, we'll just lob over to the two of you.
Yeah.
You wanna go? Anymore, she, her. And I've been really concentrating when I'm speaking with people to really focus on what they're saying and how it's being said. Also trying more to be a voice for others. Where before, if there was some kind of a comment made that made me uncomfortable, I would be silent. Working really hard at confronting is that right word, that, which is a challenge for me, but it's good for me. And I'm feeling better about it. I'm feeling more comfortable.
Thank you.
Thanks.
I'm Dr. Concy Pedrosa, she, her. My response is, I'm just trying very hard to be intentional, and every time I speak in front of people or lead a conversation, even something to be intentional and reminding people that the system wasn't designed for our students, the majority of our students. It wasn't designed within special education. It wasn't designed in advanced learning. And so what does that look like to rethink what that could possibly be? And knowing that, because I think what happens oftentimes after COVID, especially in the pandemic, is people for comfort revert back to old ways of being and doing and seeing. So how do we rethink what that actually looks like for our students? And so I'm always reminding folks, so an example of that is policy reviews, right? We look at WASDA and we look at all these other things, but reminding everybody that those two are institutions that are actually trying to undo racism and undo inequitable practices, and they're not there yet either. So when we're comparing our policies with WASDA or comparing to anything, is yes, we need to, because we need to be aligned, but then add that layer of equity analysis and anti-racist view to ensure that this actually is Tukwila in a way. So I'm just, every time I do that with my teams, we're trying to be really thoughtful and just remind everybody that we know the system isn't designed for our kids. So we have to be the ones to put that extra layer and gaze onto it to unpack that as a team. So.
Yeah, thank you. I definitely heard from all of you this layer of thoughtfulness and a layer of intentionality. I think what I do to decenter whiteness is to absolutely name whiteness, white supremacy culture, white supremacy wherever I am. And I wasn't always comfortable doing that either. And depending on where I am, I range in my feeling of comfort. But I feel like that's the way, that's my personal way that I start to decenter it, is by naming it where I see it, and then reminding people what should they be centering. So for Tukwila, as a diverse school, as I was driving in, I saw some students jogging, or I guess they're doing running. I don't know what happens in gym anymore, but anyway,
They're moving.
it was a whole group of students, and I was like, those are some diverse students. I mean, it just, it hit me. I was like, wow, this is the student body that Tukwila often discusses. And I was thinking, in what ways do those students feel like whiteness is decentered for them? Right, so it was just a reminder. So I just try and name it.
Mhm.
What do you do?
I agree with the naming. I think I try to name all the time. Chris Knaus.
I'm sorry, I'm Rochelle.
It's all
Shear.
good. I don't have a pronoun preference.
Nice,
I move around the globe, and gender is very
fluid.
fluid and very context specific as well with definitions. And so I definitely like to name it, which is awkward. I think people in most meetings like, here goes Chris again. I've been getting that most of my life, is like, if Chris is on that fill in the blank, then that means he's going to say stuff. It's like, yeah, that's me. So, which means I either get invited to too many places or not enough, or uninvited, right? And the second, for me, is naming has become like, it's kind of going back to the acknowledgement. It's like naming has become a lot easier now in context and for certain people within it, because we've normalized some kinds of naming, and then moving to like, so what does that look like systemically? So Dr. Pedroza, I appreciate you naming that, like, so, but how do we actually think about systems shifting versus, and so a lot of what I try to do is create spaces, which, whether or not, if it's mostly white folks who are in those rooms, it's like, so how do you all white folk, how do we all think about decentering ourselves in these spaces while bringing in other folks into places that may still be toxic? So that's not necessarily a healing, welcoming space to re-envision something anew when still living the impacts of racism and the structures of racism, right? So trying to reimagine what it even means to create space for folks. Because if we're using the spaces that were designed for promoting racism, right?
And doing it in a manner that people are receptive to it and not overly offended. Because I think there's that fine line between, oh, here she goes again, or, oh, she has a point, you know? Are you rolling your eyes? Were you rolling your eyes? I mean, you were.
Me?
Well, I thought you were processing something I said, and
I was processing it because I was wondering if I was wondering when you said that, I was like, I wonder which one I am.
oh, okay, I did, because I have been called out very harshly
Yeah,
for a comment or two.
yeah.
And so I am cautious when I'm speaking to people, but everybody has a line. And
I
it's-
know, but
And yet you want to be honest and you want change, and how do we promote that without going overboard?
and I was just thinking, I probably offend people more than I'm cautious. And that's why when you brought that up, I was like, which one do
Well,
I
I
do?
didn't mean going past that in a negative way, I just,
Oh.
I saw you going like this, and I thought, she's in deep thought.
Oh, for sure.
Right.
Of course, my mother would have been like, are you rolling your eyes at me? So then that's why I was like, what? What's going on? Oh my God. Yeah, I that resonates with me very interestingly. Yeah, thank you.
I want people to hear it, but and be aware of it, but I don't want to push them over that edge where they're not.
That's right.
listening.
Although I gotta think.
Well, I had this discussion with somebody I had for lunch. We were talking about race and equity, and she said, do you think that the staff gets it? And I said, I think that staff gets it. for the most part. But I think there are some people that, doesn't matter how much training
Right,
we go
Right.
through,
yeah, absolutely,
it's not gonna be there.
yes.
And she goes, I can make those people, and it's
Right.
time. It's,
I feel like change management tells us that, 50% of the people are gonna be with you, and 30% of the people are gonna be doubters, and 20% of the people are never, ever, ever gonna accept the change. And I think you just have to roll with that.
yeah.
And our country is demonstrating. When last we were here, we talked about systems moving to self-correct. And we were here with your principals and and some central office people, and they did not like hearing that. But it is the reality of what happens with white supremacy. So it really resonated with me because I was like, yeah, I think people get a little offended, and I'm not sure how to shift change without them being offended, because change is about beliefs and behaviors.
Right.
And I don't want it to be just performative, because that's behavior. So then there has to be a shift in your belief. And I don't think you get those shifts unless there's something jarring. But I hear you, because then sometimes they shut down. So
I think it's the difference between shaming
yeah.
and discomfort.
Mhm,
Mhm.
mhm.
I think those are two different things.
And it's fine.
I think they're often conflated.
And I think they are conflated.
Yeah,
And I think sometimes you can feel both,
right.
you can feel both. And so that depends on the work that we have to do. So
Oh, there's
anyway.
something. Oh,
So anyway,
Jen looks
Yeah.
like she's thinking. No, we're not thinking.
I wanna definitely go back to that too. I also wanna, do we have time, can I just share something I think that when we were talking about?
We do
the rest
have
of the
time.
I think it's.
Yeah.
relevant. So something I've been reflecting on a lot is, white not a norm around kind of one right way of
Totally.
doing things. And, I've done a lot of shifting in my own heart and mind to get away from binary and myself and just in the world as well.
Right.
But what you said about this idea of like even being able to vision, I feel so stuck sometimes because I think it came up when I think about like how we just increase communication, right? How we're getting input and more in a more holistic, effective way. It's not the right words, but I'm thinking about like nothing ever feels good enough for me, right? It doesn't feel like what we're doing is enough, and I feel like we continue to do more, but yet that feels inherently problematic because I'm like, well, if nothing's ever good enough, then that's sitting in that white dominant norm, right?
Right.
But at the same time, that bare minimum that it feels like we often do isn't good enough, right?
That's right.
And so
That's right.
what I'm having a really hard
That's right.
time, I think, often kind of getting out of is that how do I actually envision something different? Because my mind is just stuck within the systems and these tools that we all have. How can we do it differently than that? And that's not, I don't think that's gonna get us where we need to go,
Mhm,
but I'm not sure how to get to the
Mhm.
visioning part of it.
mhm,
Um,
mhm,
So I'm kind of really toying with that,
mhm.
just being stuck in that one right way, not knowing what the one right way is, but feeling like I need to know that.
Mhm.
Anyway, so just wanted to kind of share.
I appreciate that. And Jan, just so you know, I know you sent a direct message to me, but unfortunately that's shared with everybody because you're up on the screen. So I want you to know that. We can come back to that if there's time for that too. Because I think that's connected to this conversation, right? And I just like what I've been wrestling with professionally for a long time is and especially as I move around districts, different kinds of community, everybody has different kinds of norms in all the spaces, but we all kind of do the same thing, right? And so everybody's claiming to do this more radical than this other group because they have kind of more progressive quote unquote language. And it's like, yeah, but practice, children experience this the exact same way, right? Or similarly, right? And part of me is like, as a white person, as a white dude who's identified often, always, and then as a PhD academic, like I have all these sets of privileges that are also blinders, right? I mean, that's how privilege works within that conversation. So to me, I'm like, I'm probably not the best person to be coming up with all the ideas. Right, that sounds like it, right? But I'm like, and as a white person, I'm like, actually, part of my role is to interrupt whiteness in these conversations, cultivate spaces for other people, but also recognizing what I said, like that those spaces are still racist, heterosexist, they're still problematic spaces. So not like, here's a space, I'm not going to be there now. People of color, you go figure this out. It's like, no, we're still here. I may not be speaking in the same kind of way or on the same kinds of things. My role may be different in different kind of spaces, and trying to like essentially like cultivate space, but also recognize that I'm still needed to make it this fine line that we're talking about, right? Like there's still a role for me to play, especially in a leadership kind of, because I occupy leadership roles in that way. I feel like for me, there's a space to navigate. And the only way to like really know that is to be in conversation with critical folks of color who are also trying to wrestle and create and be like, nah, Chris, that's what you thought you were doing. You were talking a lot, or you were taking up space, right? So, I mean, and that's hard to do when we're in public spaces, right? Because that's really having like public, private relationships with different kinds of folks across communities, right? And in the work. I don't know if that like kind of helps.
So critically important, because it just reminded me, what does that look like, right? Because I know that was gonna be the next thing. Well, what does that look like? So that's what actually
It's the right question.
removing, being able to, oh, there's so much that's going on, get
Right.
myself together. So I'll just say what I've seen Chris do is he had, he loves, I call him a Lego piece, right? He's a connector. And so that might be a Tinker Toy. Okay, it's one of those things that connects the pieces to the things. You guys know what I'm talking about? Those of you, okay. So I remember he had, they were trying to figure out something at his university, and he was like, we're not the right people to figure this out. And that was really huge, because generally the right people are the people, or they think they are, they're the leaders. And Chris was like, we're too far removed from it. How about we create a space where the people who are actually doing the work are actually at the table, not even at the table, they are the table. So what I saw him do was pull together the people who are actually doing the work, have some leaders in the room, but the leaders were largely silent, but they were there to think about barriers. Right? While the folks of color who were doing the work, who were closer to the work, were like, if you really want it to work, it's got to be this. And instead of the leaders going, there's no way we could possibly do that, leaders were like, we hadn't thought about that. Can we have a conversation about ways in which like we could make some of those things happen? But it wasn't the leaders coming up. So for you as board members, it's not up to you, per se, to think of the things that need to happen. But one of the things that you might want to think about is, how do you create open forums, both in your neighborhood areas and as a larger board, to have the people who are doing the work, who are closer to the work, the students, the teachers of color, right, the communities of color, to be like, let's grapple with this, listening to them, not from a place of, I'm going to take your stuff and then I'm going to implement it, but how do you effectively decenter yourselves so that those communities of color are centered? And I just want to say, you also gave us really good food, which is really important. It was just really amazing food. And it made me go, oh, this is what other leaders should be doing. So I'm able to then push when I'm with other leaders who are generally white, generally privileged, generally have doctorates, to be like, how can I move you over a little bit? Right. I don't say decenter, but how can I move you over so that these folks are really, really the ones who need to come up with what is the things that maybe we can't conceptualize. But I bet if you asked almost any person who's really close to the work, they're like, here's the 3 things you need to do to make this better. And then our job as leaders, as board members, as superintendents, those people who hold the power, is to remove the barriers, right, so that those things can actually start to happen. Right. And I had just forgotten about that. Thank you for bringing that into the space. Yeah, for sure.
That's a good question there.
Yeah.
What that leads, and thinking about myself, and one of the things I feel like has been coming out of my mouth a lot is like, you know, I feel like our role as the board members is like, you know, y'all figure out the wage thing, we need to codify in policy, right? So that it is written there, so that it paves the way for those things to continue to happen. I think what I worry about, and even listening to you describe that there, is like, it gives us almost a pass to be a little bit more passive in the work, and I don't wanna be passive.
Yeah.
Right, so how do we balance the
Passivity.
with, so,
I don't think it's passive to create the space. I don't think it's passive to be like, I hear you very concretely. I met with a group of kindergarten teachers, in Oakland. We have a newcomer policy. And, they were the ones who were getting our newcomer babies. And the superintendent and folks were like, we think it should be this, we should create a policy. And I was like, before we do that, can we talk with the folks and the families of our newcomer babies? Like, what do they need? And it wasn't passive. They had to create a whole space so that so folks could be welcome. There's a trust issue
Right.
there in a newcomer situation. All these things had to happen that was not passive at all. But the dreaming and designing really came from the communities of color and from those newcomer families, so that the leaders were able to take that and be like, we're gonna remove these barriers. And I can't tell you that that's not passive enough. The removal of barriers,
it's huge.
Yeah.
huge.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So that's where your policy is, where you're like, in order to make it happen for this group of people, we're gonna remove these barriers that were there before. And it was so amazing to see the light come on for the leaders when they spoke with communities, and just, I believe, they didn't say this, but I believe that as leaders, we think it's our job to know it all. And I felt like the leaders were like, oh, I didn't have to know it all.
Free yourself.
And that was really big for them. They'll never admit it, but I felt like that was really huge. So I don't think it's passive. It's working in community with folks. It just means that maybe you don't hold all the answers, and we don't hold all the answers, and we're able to say, we believe you have the answers. I'm gonna create the space for you. Not passive at all.
And Hansi has an opportunity to meet with one of our community members who spoke to me at night out next time, and very adamantly that she would not encourage her parents to send their children to temple schools. And she told me why. And so Hansi and the HR person are going to meet with her, because in her frame of reference, Black employees are not welcome. And so Hansi is all over this opportunity to meet with this woman, and she's agreed to it, to find out what we are doing that's not promoting that in a positive manner. And I really appreciate Hansi being open to doing that. That this woman, I think, has the potential to help lead us into a more positive role.
Yeah, I definitely think, so, you know, Constance, you got a lot to do, but I. Yes, right.
Right.
Fighting for every day. Right, there's a lot for you to do.
But you know what, I will say this, that's the good work. That is.
Yeah.
It's, you know, I think about, you know, when we were, you know, in the past, you know, every time I've gone to community, and this is what I say, the debt. I think about
Education debt.
the educational debt that we owe.
Yes.
The least I can do is listen to the families and the students.
Right.
About the impact on them. But what's owed back to them is to not lose their intellectual property and to take that information and bring it back to improve the system.
Right.
Right? When that's
Right.
paying part, not completely, but that's a little step in paying that educational debt. And if you can do that to keep
Right.
improving the system, then they will feel that they're actually, them sharing
Completely.
those stories, that they're sharing their experiences, actually led to something more meaningful for their kids or future kids. And
Mhm,
so
mhm.
I feel like it's not just necessary, I feel like it's, that's what you should do.
Right.
And for
Right.
the employees, right? So in what
Right.
ways are we capturing data from when our employees leave, not just when our students leave? Specifically our Black employees, if that's what, we're hearing in the community. So yeah, lots and lots and lots and lots of work. This was just slide 3.
Which we're not even done, because we're gonna come back to pronouns if we have. time.
Oh, yeah,
Let's
well, we
check.
could do that. You want to do that now? Yeah, I mean, I'm just
tone
saying it's
checking.
slide 3, but I'm fine I think it's 20 slides, but okay. Right. I mean,
We're deep, man.
yeah, we're deep in it. I was like, I want to do what you guys need done. So yeah, you want to have that conversation?
Yeah, Director
Okay.
Bolajak, I know you, I don't want to, so you can just say, no, I sent you a note that was individual and now is public. So you can, if you don't want to take the ball, I'm happy to. But if you would like to speak to that.
Well, I just kind of spelled it out, saying that I've always been uncomfortable determining, because it's not, when I say she, her, I'm selling myself out, because that is not true. But sometimes it is true. So it's always made me really uncomfortable. And when I have tried to dodge it in my own language, it has felt more like a dodge, and I've been criticized for it. So I was just appreciating the way you were able to just name it as more fluid than you felt. I don't know how you said it. I need you to say it again so that I can pick up on it.
So you capture it, right?
Yeah, that's all.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I mean, just like land acknowledgement, right? Like how we identify and how we identify publicly versus how we're seen as identifying, right? I mean, there's so much trauma behind how we silence around gender norms, around sexism, around heterosexism, right? So part of what I try to, one, is be in conversation with folks who are kind of, how do I say it? I always say, like, I want to be around people who are always way more radical than me, so that they rub off on me. So then I become more radical than I think I am, because I think I'm radical. And so I do that with every kind of connection at some point, right? So that means I have like very close friends that are like, Chris, you talk all this deep thing, but you're not, shut up, that's wrong. And I just appreciate kind of normalizing, like, no, how you're saying right now doesn't reflect what I know of you in that kind of way, right? So part of me is like always putting myself around people who, not to always make them work for me, but because we're homies, we're colleagues in the conversation. So it's something's going to come up because we're already talking trash about other stuff. In that way. And the other thing for me is that this is going with our naming. When I identify in a lot of different ways, in a lot of different spaces, I always try to put a critique in there. It's like, let me just name that we're in a very violently binary world, and then say something, right? And I feel like to me that recognition, for me, is important, because I recognize, especially if we're talking about gender norms, and people see me in this space and place as cisgendered male. And so I'm like, I recognize that comes with privilege, regardless of how I identify. That also comes with difficulties if I don't identify as that, but there's still privileges in that. That's a whole lot to say I'm just trying to open, right? So I'm like, how do I not say all of that, but also at least kind of note that we're in a systemic anti people, and specifically anti folks who don't fit with the gender that people want to put on them, right? And I think that's important to name. To me, that is part of the purpose of pronouns for me, of naming and identifying with pronouns. That's not what we have done, because it's become a performative process. And I think that's where some of that critique comes back of like, well, this is a performative thing, then that's no longer meaningful. So then how do I actually interrupt this now that it's a performance supposedly about recognizing gender binaries, but it often isn't recognizing those, right? I don't know if that makes sense.
And I also want to say that there's a little bit of privilege being in the Washington area, because when I'm in Oakland and I'm like, put your pronouns in this space, they're like, what? You want me to do what? So in a lot of spaces, that
Yes.
is still not being being even considered. I will say, I feel horribly when I refer to someone outside of their preferred pronoun. And so as a facilitator, a lot of times I'm like, can I use that so that if I say, oh, well, they are doing, or he or she is doing, I don't want to offend, right? So I ask the question. But Chris has started to push my thinking around just how to respond so it isn't quite so performative. And I have to, pick and choose those spots because everybody's not there. So you're talking about offense, honey. Listen, there are some places where if I open up that can of worms, it's gonna be a whole nother thing. I'm never gonna get to why I'm there. And I have to read the room.
Right.
So I think it's a continual piece. What I hope is that what we can do as we continue to grow is create this space for people who, for everyone to be able to self-identify however they want. And then that's just that, right? And we just honor that. It's dicey, depending upon where I am.
This be really challenging for you.
I have to read the room wherever I go. Yeah, and yeah, I'll just, yeah. But thank you
Yeah.
so much, Ken,
Yeah.
for bringing that up. Are we ready to move past slide 3? I feel like
It's all
we said
good.
a lot of good things here. So the next, we're talking about who we are and our 5 Ds. I will say that we it used to say Canals and Rogers are in press. We've been published. So woo, that's what's up. So we'll make sure that we get that to you. But basically, this is our framework for how to deal with shifting racism in particularly in school districts. We spend a lot of time talking about teacher leaders in this article, but also it's just really the way that we think things can work. So we'll get that to you. It's an article. It's about 20 pages long. So my feedback that I've received from my people is like, it's really long. So
Academia is a lot.
it's not a book.
Academia, you can't challenge everything in academia in one article.
Right. I was like, is
And get
it
published.
20
Even if
pages?
you want
They're
it.
like, so we'll get that to you. I think that'd be good for you, especially you'll see a lot of the work that we try to do with you in that. So anyway, here are our goals, and I'm gonna move right past that and our roles, and we're all off the flow. And I'm gonna assume we know our community agreements, and I think you know how.
You already, yeah.
I'm just rolling through these
Except
slides.
when you click on it, it doesn't move it over here.
Oh,
So I'm trying to follow you.
I'm so, oh my God.
We good.
So we're gonna move past
You can
community
just-
agreements. I think we know what's happening. I think you know how we move. This is not our first time with you. But what I will say is we talked about applied critical race theory a lot. And so just understanding these 4 tenets is how we consider our work within Tukwila, right? That racism is indeed everywhere and all the time. That the purpose of schools is really to silence Blackness, that's Black students and Black adults. That the cultivation of people, the global majority, and their voice and their storytelling is how you create counter narratives and systems autocorrect. And that's just coming back to how we began at the, on that first slide with things that are happening in Arkansas, Florida. Listen, anytime you can have a law that's been on the books forever, right? That talks about the way that we are going to help folks of color get into schools, right? Because they had traditionally not been in schools. And then we systemically roll back that same law, then that's called autocorrection. And I just really want to make sure that we're clear on that, that when you have a law like affirmative action that has the data to support the fact that people were able to, people of color were better able to get into schools. And then you have a group that says, no, that's not fair, so that they roll back that law. That is the system autocorrecting for whiteness. So what's gonna happen is, well, anyway, so I just want to use that as an example because again, when we were here in May or whatever, a lot of Tukwila folks kind of were like, no, we don't believe in autocorrect. And I was like, here's an example. Okay, so that's what happened there. So we have this little video for you. Will it happen on the,
No, what I would suggest
you
is,
skip the video?
no, I think we can watch the video, but I think Jan and Dave, I think it's probably gonna be easier if you watch the video on your own screen. I would imagine,
Because this doesn't have sound.
right?
Should we just say what it is and have people watch it later? I don't.
You wanna play it just a couple minutes.
Okay.
I mean, like a minute. Just-
Okay, let's see what happens. Woo,
Right, so I should be able to play this and I think we should be able to hear it, because it,
this is the one from PragerU.
yeah,
Let's see what happens.
okay.
And now for
Okay,
a brief
that's it.
history of
Okay,
slavery.
so pause.
Here's the first thing you need.
Okay, Candace, thank you. Can, Director Bolajek, Director Larson, can you hear that? Or you guys, I see a thumb, all right. I love it when something works.
Can't see it though, right? Or, right, so you have this on slide 10. So if you, yeah, I would say if you wanna, if it's easier, just mute us and then you can play that.
Need to know. Slavery was not invented by white people. It did not start in 1619 when the first slaves came to Jamestown. It existed before then. It did not start in 1492 when Columbus discovered the New World. In fact, when the intrepid explorer landed in the Bahamas, the native Taino tribe hoped that he would help them defeat their aggressive neighbors, the Caribs. The Caribs enslaved the Taino and, on occasion, served them for dinner. Slavery existed in Africa, Asia, and the Middle East. The word slave actually comes from the Slavs of Eastern Europe. Millions of them, all white by the way, were captured and enslaved by Muslims in the 9th century and later by the Ottoman Turks. Slavery existed when the Roman Empire controlled the Mediterranean and most of Europe from the 1st through the 5th centuries. Slavery existed when Alexander the Great conquered Persia in the 4th century BC. It was so common that Aristotle simply considered it natural. The slave master model was just how the world operated in the great philosopher's day. Slavery existed during the time of the ancient Egyptians 5,000 years ago. As far back as we can go in human history, we find slavery. As renowned historian John Steele Gordon notes from time immemorial, slaves were a major item of commerce. As much as a third of the population of the ancient world was enslaved. Here's the second thing you need to know. White people were the first to formally put an end to slavery. In 1833, Britain was the first country in the history of the world to pass a Slavery Abolition Act. They were
Yeah,
quickly
stop it.
followed by France, who in 1848 abolished slavery in her many colonies. Then, of course, came the 13th Amendment in the United States Constitution. After centuries of human slavery, white men led the world in putting an end to the
White men.
abhorrent
Thank goodness for
practice.
white men.
Thank God
That
for white.
includes the 300,000 Union soldiers, overwhelmingly white, who died during the Civil War. Now, am I saying that this makes white people better than anyone else? Of course not. My purpose here is to simply tell the truth, and the truth is that human history is complicated. No one, regardless of skin color, stands guiltless.
No.
Yet today we are never told to consider the murderous Persian Empire or the cannibalism of indigenous tribes of North and South America or the heinous actions under the imperialistic Muslim, Chinese, Mongol, or Japanese empires, to name just a few. Instead, we're told that slavery is a white phenomenon. And like all persistent lies, this lie spawns a bunch of other lies. On social media, I come across
I feel like
extraordinary
that's all I
depictions
can
about
take.
how Africans lived like
I
pharaohs.
can't take more, Candace. We're happy to send you this. So there's a couple of things.
It's on the.
Yeah,
Oh,
you have,
right, you
yeah,
already have it.
it's sent enough.
So there's a whole thing from Prager University, right? So if you look at Prager, they have, this was but one of several videos that they are teaching, and to put a black face on it with Candace Owens is, purposeful. Why would we show this right now? I know you're like, Rochelle, this is horrible.
Certainly that wouldn't happen here.
Well, but it could.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, videos are accessible to anybody.
Yeah.
Yep.
Videos are accessible
Yep.
to our children, our
Yep.
teachers. And,
Yep.
if somebody hasn't done the work,
Yep.
in understanding, because it's subtle, that video is subtle,
Right.
right? It is packaged like any other institution. It has a university name on it. It has people who, are looked at to be credible, maybe in terms of, or, that's and then this is accessible. So
Totally.
anyone who doesn't have, I would say, an equity analysis lens or a critical lens, or even deep understanding of history.
Right.
Could just take this as face value as the truth, all of it. Even, there are some elements of it that are true.
Yes,
There are
absolutely.
definitely elements that are true. But there are definitely elements that are not true, or actually are slanted, and I think that is the danger of it, right? And I think, and in the wrong hands, it will just perpetuate thinking that is counter to what we're actually trying to do.
That's right. Absolutely.
So, that's,
So my thing is, I came across it, and I didn't tell you this, but I showed it to my son, right after the first thing he went to bed. He was like, turn that off. But he's had a critical analysis, to your point. He was in the Race Policy and Law Academy at his school from 10th grade to 12th grade, right? And all they did was talk about how do we look at things. So he has that analysis. But I'm thinking of a middle schooler, or someone else who is like, wait, what's wrong with this, mom? What's wrong with this, dad? Right?
It makes sense.
It makes sense.
don't
And
have any
Candace
counting.
Owens is famous, and right. So if we are not educating, right, then you have no analysis. And so when there used to be a time when these counter narratives, if we can even call them that, were like, you had to really dig to find them.
Mhm.
You know what I mean? Because people knew, well, this is the truth, and this is like a group of people over here. But it's very, very widespread now. And with the advent of what Florida is doing, giving rise to other states,
Yep.
right? Being able to go, that sounds like a good idea. This is really going to be up to educators to be that last line of defense. Right. And so I had to show it. We talked about it. I was like, ooh, this is something. But amazing, how amazing would it be to have educators who could be like, what's wrong with this video?
Right.
And be able to, in age appropriate, clearly not in pre-K, but to be age appropriate, to have those conversations so that we can create really thoughtful graduates, right? And so when I think about what we want to do as a board, that's why I started with what's our response. This is YouTube, yeah. This wasn't even difficult.
Well, it's all for Instagram too. TikTok. Not that video
Yeah, it's
specifically, but.
right.
Probably
Candace
part of it.
Owens.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's all over.
That makes me think about, we go to the annual WASA conference every year, and I
Yeah.
was sitting in, someone was talking about native studies, and talking about old books, textbooks that have
Mhm.
just really problematic material, in it, but using them in that way,
Mhm.
as a way of actually saying, all right, open up to this page and read it, what's missing here, what's not reflected here, what's wrong with these things, and I think that's such a good idea, that really being able to use our analytical brains is, I think, a piece that was maybe missing in the,
Mhm.
so world of social media.
Mhm.
Easy access to information, being able to like critically look through those things and identify.
Yeah, our young people, unless we are, again, unless we are the last holders, right? Unless we are the defense for our young people, when they're scrolling, TikTok is it's a great tool. It's wonderful, but there's little snippets. And if you're not really critical and really thinking, there's some stuff that just pops up and I'll be like, how did that get into my whatever timeline or whatever the thing was? I was like, I don't want to see this, but I'm already thinking about it. But a young person, one of our babies, one of our students,
Right.
we have to hold the line. And our response has to be very, very clear. This is truth. Here's the data that undergirds it, and this is what we teach. And this is how you think critically about things that might come to you, right? Education is the only answer. And we have to, videos like this, we have to be ready. Like I cannot stress that
Mhm.
enough.
Mhm.
So a few months ago, we discussed anti-racist school board leadership. I don't know if you guys remember, we did a full jam board about it. I know you're like, that was several months ago, Rochelle. This is a whole new life. Right. Oh, you did?
Yeah.
Can you click on that jam board for people?
Do it.
Just so Concy can see it. So this is some of the work that we did where we were like, what's our role in school board? And we had board members to think about, how Jamboard works. I don't know why I'm explaining that to you. And she was like, I've done several of them. And then page 2, we talked about overarching roles and then what's our individual role. And there was a lot of work that came out of that, right? So we sort of looked at all the data and put it together and shared this with you at, I believe, our last retreat, where what we came up with is that we want to be learners, builders, and risk takers on the individual level. And that's, in our lives, right? Bettina Love says, I don't want teachers who are like anti-racist from 9 to 3. I want people who are doing this as part of who they are, right? So as an individual person, this is what you all gave us as board members. We want to be learners, builders, and risk takers. But as board leaders, we really want to develop listening. We want to ensure alignment across I thought I heard somebody knocking. And we want to create policies and spaces, and we want to decenter. So you'll notice we're taking what you gave us and using these same questions throughout when we come back to you, like, in what ways are you doing that? So we were going to do a turn and talk. This is more like a share and not turn and talk. I had envisioned people in the room. So what's your personal response to some of these attacks? And I know we're like, that's not going to happen here in Tukwila, but you need to have a personal response. And then what's the board response to attacks against school curriculum? This is, if we're not ready to talk about it now, we don't want to wait until somebody goes, I don't think you should teach that.
Right.
So instead of a turn and talk, I guess whole group.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll do whole group.
I know, differentiated.
I know it's
Not
not
a lot of
for me. I'm like, oh my gosh, we need to have a different forum. All right. Personally, what's our personal response? Somebody walks up to you at Safeway. Your Safeway is beautiful, by the way. Went over to I don't know where I was, but it was like 5 minutes away. It's so pretty and clean.
Where were you?
I don't
Safeway.
know that I don't think it's.
I don't think it's,
that.
yeah,
Oh,
Yeah.
over.
Maybe you
I
went
don't know.
to Fury Safeway?
No, that's not even good.
Okay, I don't know. And
all I know is it was clean and well lit and really nice. And I was like,
It's
so
confusing.
beautiful
The
Safeway.
boundaries of like 3 cities are.
Oh yeah, I don't know. I just put it in my thing and drove to it.
Thank you.
Nicely done. Own it, own it.
And you guys had carts.
It's the
And
Safeway, not the city or anything. I'm just
there was
saying.
there's no carts in my Safeway. So. Right, and so you have to walk around till somebody comes up with a cart and then follow them to their car because people keep stealing the carts. So I was really excited. I was like, look at all these
Yeah,
beautiful.
we don't have, we don't have.
You know why
Yeah.
they don't still are closed? Because they have these blocks on them that when they hit a certain place where.
Oh.
they- We don't.
We missed that.
We're just talking about gentrification and
Yeah.
Right.
resources in neighborhoods.
Right.
Which is wonderful.
So you're at Safeway and somebody was like, I saw you as a board member or a superintendent, and I want you to know, I'm not gonna stand for my child to be learning about, you're trying to brainstorm my child when you teach them critical race theory. What's your personal response?
Each of the board president.
Oh, okay.
That would be your response.
Here's their email address.
That's hilarious.
We would just ask for a conversation to be had. So, I mean, that's what I would do is there a way that we could meet together and have a conversation?
I think my personal response would be obviously a little bit dependent on what they were talking about, but if they said, you know, critical race theory, try to bring that in, I mean, I think just first acknowledge that we're not actually teaching critical race theory in schools.
Yeah.
We're teaching history, truth. And I think probably reflecting back on just my own experience as a learner, right? And the things that I didn't know and learn to be true until I was 25 or 30 years old,
Yeah.
Which is not that long ago.
Right.
And you know, how that has just deeply impacted the way that I see the world, right? And so it's about, you know, centering reality and truth. And that may be really hard and uncomfortable.
Right.
Yeah, so that's probably where I'd start.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think, you know, CRT is one of those interesting words that it can mean, I guess the first question I would ask is, so what do they mean by it? I mean, because
Mhm.
50, I mean, people are using it to mean whatever they want it to mean. And so
Right.
when you're starting a discussion about, and you know, you don't even know what they're talking about,
Mhm.
that's kind of step one. But, you know, I mean, ultimately, frequently, you know, particularly the right wing, it comes down to kind of a denial of white supremacy. And so, you know, you have to just, you know, we're in our schools, we're teaching truth. And, you know, if you're, if you're in denial on white supremacy, then, you know, that's another, I guess, whole conversation, but you know, we're not gonna deny that. So, because it's just not the truth.
Love it.
Yeah, that's a lot.
I was gonna say, for me, I think what I would start with is just asking them, is there any, just starting to start with the personal, right? And saying, is there anything that you learned after graduation that you wish you'd known
Mm.
about, that you wish you'd known
Mhm.
that? Because then I'll just share, for me,
Mhm.
like, for example, being Mexican American, I wish I'd known X, or I wish I'd known this, and I never got to know that. And I had to learn it later, and I had to learn later about the contributions
right.
of my grandfather.
Mhm.
And I would just start from a place of empathy on a human level about just making that first connection, because it starts with relationships and
Totally.
trust.
Totally.
And then asking them to share more, just kind of like what Dirk Lawrence was like, and then so tell me more about
Mm.
what is this that you're, you know, what is it that you're talking, what is critical race theory, or what is this agenda, or what is it that you're nervous about, and then let's just sort of unpack that. I think that's how I would start with that human level first,
Totally.
and then going
Totally.
into the why.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mhm.
Humanity can disarm people.
Sometimes it can, sometimes
Right.
it can't.
Yeah, totally. Right.
So it can disarm you.
Right.
Mhm. Mhm. I think it's important that as leaders of the district, that we start having those conversations to prepare. And not even from justification purposes, but just so that we know deeply for ourselves, right? That what we're teaching, what we plan to teach, what we are holding true for the curriculum is the right thing to be teaching. So we can't even have a doubt in ourselves. We need to be super clear.
Mhm.
And one of the ways that we're clear is when people question.
Right.
Right? And I like the fact that no one said I would just be angry, but being able to like respond to people in a way that sees their humanity, that asks them for another conversation, that says, this is what we're gonna do, to be like, I feel like, Dave, if I did what you said, it would come off wrong, because I'd be like, so what do you mean by critical race theory? So like that, being able to have the ability to ask from a place of inquiry that would not further inflame the person asking the question, right?
I think that's something I definitely struggle with a lot.
Yeah.
I think particularly, living in the era that we do, I think particularly if it were a white person, right? I think I have a lot less patience.
Yeah.
And it shows, and I think that's something I've actually been grappling a lot with, is like, recognizing that even the privilege that I have to challenge things in a way that I do.
Yeah.
And, you know, when is it appropriate to lean into that privilege and when is it not? And I'm not learning, I'm like, that's a new journey for me. I've been thinking about it actively, but,
Mhm.
I mean, there are certain situations where I could see myself getting pretty irritated
Yeah.
with a person,
Yeah.
particularly if there was this, you know, I think particularly when I don't see other people seeing others' humanity, right, seeing the humanity of the people that we're talking about, right?
Right.
Just really gets me very frustrated.
Mhm.
And then it comes out, and I'm sure it shuts people down, and I'm mad about that sometimes, but.
I wonder how you talked about with our district leadership team about the difference between being an ally, which I think is passive,
Right.
and what you're talking about, which I think there's an edge to it, is being a co-conspirator, right?
Mhm.
And really leaning in to those conversations and speaking up. Because let's face it, you can, and people will listen to you more than others, right? And so in a way, it's a privilege, but for us folks who are tired of talking about it and living it every day, it's actually for us sometimes even, we're thankful. It's not all the time, but we are thankful. We don't want you to speak for us, but when we're tired, it is nice to have somebody leaning into those conversations. Because it might be more accepting from you versus another, or myself, or somebody, or we're just suffering from racism fatigue.
Right.
And we can't do it this moment, and we need you to do that. So I will say, it's there is a balance, but sometimes we are very, it's how we work together in this co-conspirator way, to ensure that we're doing the work together in a meaningful way. But I get what you're saying, because even I probably have had moments where I've been frustrated too, and
Or triggered.
or triggered,
Mhm.
very much triggered,
Yeah.
have those as well.
Mhm.
And sometimes you can't even, sometimes you're so triggered, you can't even think about what you're gonna do next.
Absolutely.
Totally.
You just can't think.
Totally.
You're paralyzed. So, to have somebody else lean in then is super
Yep.
helpful, because then
Absolutely.
the moment's not lost.
Yeah.
But I don't have to be responsible for that.
Right.
Absolutely.
Think that I think one of the things that just made me think about them is, you know, ways in which I need to make sure that I'm managing my own activation level, so that then I don't further harm, right, or not necessarily harm, you know, you in that scenario, but just, well, I guess the whole thing, right, I guess it could be beautiful. Anyway, so just particularly when, yeah.
Mhm. It's a lot, right?
It's a lot. It's a lot to manage. And the reason we're asking this question is because, A, as I said before, you want to be prepared so that when something does jump off, you know how to respond. B, you do need to figure out who are your, you know, your co-conspirators. Who are the folks that you're like, you know, this person just asked this question and we need to get back to that. I need you to be in the room. Right? Or what I'll say to Chris a lot is, so you know I'm about to be triggered. And he was like, got you, right? And then, you know, we know, having worked together for a while, that it's time for me to put myself in safety, is the way that I think about it, because I don't have time to be triggered by everybody, right? So like, we need to know what that is. But the other thing is, as a board, like, there should be a response. And I would strongly urge you to think about what that response looks like. There should be a response that you are prepping when someone talks about the curriculum. Or I use CRT because, to your point, Director Larson, that's what everybody's talking about right now, even though they're not really sure what CRT is or what it means. But there's just, I don't know if you guys offer AP African American Studies in this district, but they're coming for that. They're coming for ethnic studies, they're coming, I mean, it's not gonna stop. And so one of the things that the board should, I would recommend that the board thinks about is what's gonna be our collective response. And that can be, again, this is the proactive thing when you're thinking about policies. The thing is like, I think we have that on a slide coming up, right? So, okay, I was like, why is she waving at me?
No, it's lovely.
Oh, okay.
So,
So I think, I don't wanna, we'll
Yeah,
get to that,
we'll
but
get-
we need
yeah,
to think
that's after
about
the
what
break.
that response is for sure.
Yep.
My clock says 5:31. I know we did a bio break.
We have a quick comment too. Do you
Oh
want
my
to come
gosh,
back
I
to that, Joe?
can't, I need to keep my glasses
That's
on.
Director Bolajek.
Mhm,
Yeah.
what fears do you have?
And yeah.
Mm. Well, Cass talks a lot about the ways in which communities that immigrate to the United States, when they get to, I said Cass talks about it, I meant Wilkerson, who wrote Cass, sorry. But I was like, it's in the book. But she talks a lot about what happens when communities that immigrate to the States, when they have the notion of other groups of color, right? And that has already like permeated their thought process. And so I agree that the classroom it just has to be the place where change happens and where we teach what it means to see each other. But that can only happen if we're creating classrooms that are absolutely inclusive and anti-racist practice.
Great.
I love your question. What bothers you about this and what fears do you have? My experience is whenever I say the word fear, people who are already angry never ever respond to the word fear well. So just,
They're already shut down.
they were like, I'm not scared of anything, okay, so then that's the whole thing. Right? This is great. This is exactly the conversations we should be having. It is definitely time for a bio break. I know I need one. So we said 15, but should we come back in 10? Because 2 people aren't even here. So let's come back. It's 5:33. Okay, great. Thanks for coming back. So we covered a lot, right? We covered what's happening in the world. We covered systems move to autocorrect. We covered this notion around who we are and how hard and how difficult identity is. We covered the notion of understanding this, I'm just gonna say it, ridiculous video from PragerU, and how that is happening in more places than just Florida, right? It would be horrible if we thought it's just a Florida thing, right? That this is a movement, not just of the conservative right or the alt-right, which is how some people were like, oh, that's the alt-right, it'll never come, but rather, this is a movement across this country with an attack on curriculum. And so school districts have to be ready. So we talked about that. We talked about your leadership as a school board and where you wanted to lean in, listening, ensuring, creating, and decentering. And then we just got through talking about what's our response. What we haven't talked about is what's coming up for you. And so I would be remiss to continue to move on without being able to just check in. We threw so much at you. And we didn't go like, well, where are you with this, right? And I know different people are in different places on where they're going to be in the board and things of that nature, but if each one of you could just speak to what's coming up for you around some of the things that we brought up, or how you're even feeling in this time period about leading anti-racism work. So before we move forward, what's coming up for y'all?
really like specific level. I'm like, oh, God, writing something, makes me freak out because I don't write like words, and writing things is not like a strength of mine, so, that just, yeah, on a really
Right,
practical level, I'm
right.
like, that scares me, writing a statement scares me. But not because of what it's gonna say and what it's gonna mean,
Right.
because of like legitimately the writing of it.
Totally.
So I think one thing that was interesting when you're talking about people coming and questioning curriculum and things like that. I think, what we saw in this state over the last year is there were kind of, I don't know, lack of word, bands of people that would go around from district to district and just kind of harass districts about their curriculum. And I think, you talked about it's probably not likely that it's going to come from our community, but there are these, like I say, groups of people that would come from outside of our community, and kind of on a crusade against school boards and curriculum in general. And so, that seems to me entirely like, I mean, we managed to avoid it. They mostly went to the bigger districts last year,
Right.
but that movement is, unfortunately kind of gaining strength, I think. And so, that's, I think, probably more likely what we would see in our district rather than, something coming from within. But, nonetheless, I take your point about being, need to be prepared for it, wherever it comes from.
And while it may not start from within the district, there may be pockets that support it. Right? And that's just what happens,
Sorry.
okay.
Okay.
That's just what happens with people, right? That they're like, you know what, I probably wouldn't have started, but that makes sense to me. Right? So we have to prepare for it. Others, what's coming up for you?
Is that a work session? Have a meeting of the mind, to probably. It's that.
Can I share one thing? I don't want to overshare. Right? Can I share one more thing?
I just want to make sure I heard, you're suggesting a work session?
To come back to this,
The draft.
Yeah.
Okay.
but maybe not you writing it.
Yeah.
Right, you don't want to write, but a work session that would help sort of workshop, literally. Okay.
I'll just say for me and then go ahead, just, so it's not a secret that my previous work has been anti-racist work. That's not a secret.
Right.
Go on and look at it and,
Your name comes up.
yeah, it comes up.
Right.
But I think for me, I try to always do that work, one, centering the student, right? Always centering the student and centering, I would say, this the most vulnerable member of the community when thinking about that work. And I think if we do that, right? Because really the most vulnerable person is truly the person who's suffering many oppressions throughout the whole system, whether it's gender, whether it's race, culture, language, all of it together, right? Immigrant, all of it together. Because they have many identities, right?
Right. That's right.
And so I think that if we can, because it's beyond, right, because this one, it's the student that has multiple, I'll just, I remember, I'll just share this personally. I was in principal training, and I just had my child, my first child. And so my child is representative of many identities, many. And we were in this group with principals, to want to be principals. And we did this collective, with all the collectives. And I had a moment where I realized my own babies, my children, in most of those collectives. And I started bawling. I couldn't stop crying. I was bawling and bawling and bawling and bawling. Here I am, the 36-year-old woman bawling my eyes out, trying to act cool with these principals, and I couldn't. So luckily I left and I came back, and they allowed me to not say anything. But then I decided to say something, because I told them, look, I know you're all really caring and intentional people, but if you don't do this work, my babies aren't safe with you as your principal at all.
Yep.
And that's what scares me.
Yep.
It's not that you're not good people, because I know you're all good people. But if you don't do that work, my children will never be safe in your care. And that's why I'm crying, because I'm scared. I'm scared. And I always think of that when I think about the moms and the dads and the,
Mhm.
children.
Totally.
And I try to remember that this is, we have to all do the work, even if it's hard, right? The teachers, the paraeducators, we all, the principals, the superintendent, we all have to do that work, because it's really hard. But if we want to guarantee identity safety and emotional safety and care for our kids, and all, because with all the identities that we have, it's not just one, it's many, then we have to do it.
That's right.
It's our obligation.
Mhm.
And so that's what I am trying to think through in my role. How do I support and lead in and lean in,
Mhm.
but in a supportive way, so that people really want to dig in and be part of the work. But then also the other end, if people don't, how do I lean into that as well? Because we have to have everyone in to start, at least start learning, and start digging in and learning about what we don't know. I know that's an emotional feeling for me, but I'm sorry to be so personal here,
No,
but it is
appreciate it.
personal to me. The work is personal. And so how do I lead with that work and lean in, so that in a way that's supportive, but also very clear, this is what we're about.
Thank you. I appreciate your vulnerability in saying, this is personal for me. And I also appreciate in your role, grappling with the personal while dealing with the systemic.
Yes. They're not the same.
Absolutely not. Right. Thank you, I appreciate that. Others, what's coming up for you right now in this moment?
I'm going to add a couple of other things. So it's kind of at the macro level. So I work a lot with Washington State School Directors Association, which is the School Board Directors Association. And one of the things that happens at that organization is they come up with various values statements and legislative advocacy kind of things. And one of the things that happened, or one of the statements, value statements that the association has is that every school board should have a comprehensive equity policy. Now, that statement used to, a couple of years ago, be stated as a comprehensive race and equity policy. And they decided, or the organization voted to remove the word race from that particular statement. We have put in a proposal to put race back into that statement. And so that'll be interesting we're having our assembly next September to see that, see how that will come up for a vote. And my argument is basically going to be, if we're talking about, anything equity in the country, if you don't talk about the white supremacy basis for, the inequity, then you're kind of missing the boat. So anyway, that'll be it's kind of a thing that's coming up. It'll be interesting to see how that plays out. WASDA is historically and still currently is predominantly white organization. And so there's a lot of still sensitivity to try and deal with the issue of race. The other area that I'm working on is the regressive funding system. Again, this is another macro issue at the state level, and I've given several presentations on the nature of that, but in November, I'm going to be giving another presentation at the conference on that subject, and be working with our student representative. That's why I was talking earlier about needing to get student voice into that whole discussion. And so I have to sit down with our student rep, Dennis, and figure out how to get student, voice into that whole discussion, because, I mean, money is values, and so we really need to be looking at statewide at our funding system to figure out how to make it much more of an anti-racist kind of funding system to back up the values that we're proposing for. So anyway, those are a couple of other things that are on my list.
I wonder why, Director Larson, did they tell you why they removed the word race from the equity policy?
The statement was something like it's duplicative. There's another statement, and I've forgotten somewhere else in the values statement that talks about racial equity, but to me it's so incredibly tied to, if you talk about equity, I mean, you can't, yeah. Yeah, I don't think it's a strong reason in my estimation. So I mean, we'll see what it's the arguments. This is an assembly, like a legislative process. So there will be arguments, pros and cons, and it'll be interesting to hear what people say.
Wow.
That is fascinating to have had it on the policy, then to remove it. I mean, I would just.
And in this context.
I mean, that's
this is
crazy.
what we're like, yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Good luck with that.
Yeah, that's gonna be a lot. Thank you for your efforts there. What else is coming up for folks in this moment?
Maybe and something else too.
Oh, I'm
I
sorry.
I guess I come back to the word grace in that sometimes I think we approach all of this without a lot of grace, and that doesn't mean passivity, and that doesn't mean overlooking things. It just means giving the grace to learn what we need to learn. And we've always, in this district, I believe, we continue to have staff members that won't go to any race and equity workshops, even if they're mandated, or won't join the book group or whatever. And I get it, because there's a lot of judgment in the room when those meetings are happening. And I'm just concerned about how do we offer the grace to learn. And I mean, and we need to be pushed. There's no doubt about it in a lot of different ways. But everybody doesn't learn at the same rate, and everybody doesn't have the same experience. Everybody doesn't have the same, background. So how do we use all of that and build upon all of it with grace to become what we need to become? And I worry, I'm a short timer on the board, so I'm going to leave all this to you guys, but not the work in the district, but at least the policy making. I just want us to find a way to help people learn what they need to learn and do it in a way that honors their full humanity. Anyway, you get my point.
No, thank you. I appreciate the notion of being able to accept people where they are and then create a plan to get them where they need to be. My concern is that sometimes people don't move towards where we want them to be. And so I appreciate the notion of grace, and I get frustrated, frankly, with folks who are like, I'm not interested, or they're paying lip service, or they're being performative because they know that that's what it takes to get along. So like, I'm just gonna do enough, I'm gonna go, but I'm not gonna be really, involved, or I'm gonna go to the thing, but I'm not gonna make any changes at my school site, or I'm going to say that I was there, but I'm not gonna, I don't wanna be held accountable for doing anything, right? And so I wonder how we show grace and demonstrate grace, but also continue to push folks. And then for those who are not interested in being pushed towards our ultimate work, then how do we move them to other spaces? So I definitely want to give grace for people to learn what they need to learn. And I just need to see movement, right? So if you have a site principal and that site principal has attended a year worth of training, but hasn't done anything at their site to create anything different, then I'm like, I don't think you're interested. And what does that mean?
But also, how do we get behind what blocks their interest? Is it fear? What is it? How do we tease that out to make it something that they see has value? And maybe there are folks that just need to not be on our faculty anymore. And I think that's true. But I think for most folks, there's some fear, there's something there, there's work overload, whatever it is. How do we tease that out so that everyone is interested in moving this forward?
I don't think everyone is interested.
I think something that just came up for me when you were talking is I think it could go with what I was saying earlier about often getting frustrated. Because I think about, yes, we need to honor people's humanity through this work. And when we're not doing this work, whose humanity are we not honoring? Right. So somewhere along the way, there's humanity that is not being recognized, valued, honored. Is it the one that's right in front of you, or is it the Black and brown bodies through generations that have been harmed and continue to be? So it's just, I think it's, again, like we're centering white humanity. So that's just something I think I struggle with a lot in thinking about.
Yeah.
Grace versus push.
I feel like you said you had something else to, like 2 times ago. So.
That's okay. I wanted to make space for folks who kind of share, and I'm taking up a lot. I just something I think that has been coming up for me recently, and I don't know if that's, now that you have a 6-month-old or what, but I'm feeling a lot more fear. And I think it's escalated to by not just the time and place we're in around, taxing curriculum, but also at the time and the place and just taxing people who stand for those things. And being an elected official, my stuff is very public. My address is right there, right? And so there's this element of like, I literally had a conversation with my wife the other day. I was like, what does this mean? Like, do I stop being so bold, or do I not? She's no. To the honor range happens, whatever, but it's like, but that's a real reality.
That's right.
That I think I've just been thinking a lot about.
Yeah, I mean, that's real. Yeah, I mean, I immediately went to, what was it, the Tennessee 3? I mean, there's just so many examples of what happens when people are bold and are emboldened, and how things can, what do we do to those people? And I think about our site leaders, I think about our teachers who are trying to stand in the gap, and then they get, shut down or what have you. I think about leaders, who have tried to do some work previously, and they are not here and also not seen as being worthy. There's a lot of pieces, which gets back to like humanity and how do we push and also see people. And I don't have all the answers, but respectfully, we have to toe it's like being a parent, you know what I'm saying? Like, you got a 6-month-old, so here's some free advice. So like, for those of us who have older children, this is what happens in my house, right? In my house, we do this, this, and this, and then my son will be like, but Noah down the street doesn't have to do that, and I was like, I know. Noah doesn't live here. These are the rules that are happening in this house, and I can even explain to you why, but in this area, this is what we do. And I think that we have to be very clear as a school board and as a school district, this is what we teach here at Tukwila. Oh, but, I don't know any other districts. This other district down here doesn't say that, I don't know. I only know.
Highline, CTEC, one of
Okay.
these.
So CTEC doesn't do that, and then you're like, yeah, I know, they don't do that, but here at Tukwila, we're gonna teach truth, we're gonna teach what really happened, and we're gonna teach critical race theory, and we're gonna teach thought processing. I don't know, but I mean, like, we have to get that granular. And then we stand on it. Because it's the truth, because it's good for young people, because it's good for the people who are furthest from power, because it's good for multiple identities. We're going to do that. Right? And then we stand on it. And not everybody's gonna like it. But you will have a stronger group of educators who know what they're doing and are working towards, we're rowing in the same way, as opposed to, I'm not sure what we're doing, so we're gonna try a little bit of everything.
Right.
We're gonna literally throw the spaghetti against the wall and then see what sticks, right? And that can help us with some of that fear, because you're not standing alone. And I think when you feel like you're the one, then that's when you're targeted. But what if you're one of, how many board members was it, 6 or whatever? 5, okay, so when you're one of a group, it's a different level of targeting. I know that probably wasn't helpful, but that's what we have to be, and that's why we're having these conversations.
Oh, but I think your commitment to staff and students and fairness has spurred us all to be more strong in our voicing our opinions and pushing for policy. I just think back to that one student who got up and spoke at the board meeting, and then her father stood up and said, and I was ready, honestly, I was ready for kind of a criticism from this parent and thanking the board for doing what they're doing to support her. Wrong pronoun. The student. And I just reflect back on that so often of how your ability to take a stand provided that for that student. So you are appreciated. You're welcome. So I understand fear, but I also understand that strength that you have pervades.
You know, there's a whole thing that I use normally in some of my training that really talks about when we are fearless. Actually, I think I got this from Dr. Love again. My Lord, I read a lot of her. But you know, when we are fearless, we create space for others to be equally as fearless. Yeah. Which can be hard, because that means we have to take the first attacks, right? But if we really are clear about what we're doing for students, then it's harder for people to attack us, because we're all lined up at the same way, right?
Right.
All clear.
I also think that having that, so I think about co-conspiratorship in that conversation, especially when we talked about this previously, but I think the same dynamic is here when the board is all white except for the student who doesn't come to anything that we've been at, but your superintendent's not. So let me name that, right? As somebody coming in, external or internal, right? To like the superintendent becomes the target. So as a board, like my push on that is how do you all the extent to which you are all lining up together is the extent to which at some point you actually are supporting and lining up with your superintendent,
Mhm.
right? Who is much more of a target by role and by Google identities, also Google this person, and then there's more stuff that comes up. So right, like,
Mhm.
right,
And I'm a woman of color.
and right,
Well, that's something I think I appreciate about her, is that she's transparent and she talks to the board and she communicates. with
Right.
us so that we can support.
Yeah, and I think I've been thinking about that too, preparing to. For different pieces,
Right.
perhaps around the budget or
Right.
just, right, so. How can we ensure that we are a collective team so that when the hits come, they come to all of us?
That's
Not even just you, but not, Ms. Birdsong or,
that's right.
Mr. Whitbeck, not everyone, right, so that it's a collective.
Yep.
Really, I'd rather us take the heat, but I think you're right, that it won't be, right, so then how can we?
Let me say the reason that you have your collective is because you do need to have that support system both in the district and outside the district. And there are gonna be some things that come. But when you have a board that's supportive and says, okay, we've got you as co-conspirators, that can make it much, much, much easier as well. One step. See how I did that? See how I did that?
I'm changing the slide. We're moving to,
Boy, I'm telling you.
what slide are we on now? We're on slide 19.
I'm slide 17, you're slide 19?
I don't know what slide we're on.
Well, whatever. At any
Slide
rate.
7, slide 17.
Okay.
This isn't matching that either, so this is all.
Not gonna worry about it. So what we would like to have you think about is you have to make a decision. Will you follow the status quo? Or will you create something new? In other words, will you hurt the system or continue to harm students? And that is your number one, if I would say, essential question for board members as you go into this new year, as you get new board members. Are you gonna continue the status quo of the system? Or are you gonna damage it somehow, disrupt it somehow, right? Or are you gonna allow harm to continue for our students? And really, we put back Black Educators Matter because the same research indicates that the same harm that's happening to Black students is also happening to Black adults in the system. So when I hear folks say, I can't send my children to the system, what they're also
Right.
saying is, I don't trust the system for my kids or for me. So we have to really make a conscious decision. The system ain't working. What are we gonna do? So to that, I love every time I put my finger up, I put your finger up. So this is what you said, right? That Carla, you were like, listen, we need to make some policies. Okay, I don't want to write them, but let's break them. And so the first thing that this is sort of creating a plan for y'all post us, right?
Mhm.
That you want to think about what are the examples of anti-racist policies that you've already done the work, right? That proactively address this onslaught against ethnic studies or race consciousness or culturally responsive approaches. And if I were doing this work in a workshop or however you're gonna do it, I would make a list of the things that we've already done, right? That the policies that we put in place, the things that we know that we've worked on, right? Let's list those, see if they still hold up, right? See if they are in fact moving towards anti-racism, or if perhaps they were drafted at a time when maybe if we didn't need to have our verbiage to be quite as clear, right? So the very first thing I would do is look at those, right? And then from there, I would strongly urge us to make an example of our district anti-racism statement. I know you have an equity statement. To Director Larson's point, I think it might even be, I know you have a race and equity policy.
Right.
It's a little light. When I was looking at it when we were looking at it 2 years ago.
When the whole staff was looking at it, or the leadership.
Yeah, it was a little light. But that was what they created then. That's a great step one. I'm not suggesting you throw out the baby with the bathwater. But if we're really moving towards anti-racism, then what is the statement? So a district that I work with says, as a school district, we understand our complicity in unjust systems. Well, let me just back up. It was hell to get this policy. I just want to say that. All right, so this is not an easy thing, right? I don't want to be like, oh, I just wrote this and they gave it to them. They were like, yes. It was pure hell. And my learning from that was, damn, like just these words are hard for people, right? And so they got it as far as they could get it. I'm pretty sure it's buried on page 97 of their website, but it was very, very difficult. And so I'm acknowledging for you that this was the work that folks felt like needed to happen. And it may not live, like, I'm just want to be transparent. It may not live in the way that it's supposed to live because it was so scary for folks. So going back to Director Bolajak, like, what's the fear? Well, the fear is these words are strong. All right, but this is what they came up with. As a school district, we understand our complicity in unjust systems. So that first line, people were like, I'm not complicit. And I didn't have anything to do with it. And this happened before us, and this is not what, so, okay. We have upheld white supremacy in the past. However, we now know those principles, ideologies, and policies must be disrupted and dismantled. You can imagine the feedback on that. And this was in a city that's supposed to be very progressive. Therefore, we're committed to evolving our personal and collective active anti-racist leadership. So I know you're thinking, well, this sounds like it was okay, but wow. When we said we have upheld white supremacy in the past.
I was about to say, it should say past, present.
Nuance.
Right, it was, yeah, it was, listen.
That would have taken another 3 years.
It was just really hard for people to say, I'm part of a system that's upheld white supremacy. So to Director Larson's point, people do not want to say that. I'm not saying this has to be Tuckwilla's statement,
Right.
but I am saying the work of the, in my opinion, in our opinion, the work of the district and the board has to be that some sort of statement that's not, we recognize the beauty of all people. And I'm sorry.
It already says that. I mean, it doesn't.
You're supposed to stop me, but we just have to take it a little bit further, because when the attacks come, we need to already know what we are standing for.
I think that's important, and I also wonder, for me, you said this was, for me, it's about the actions.
Totally.
And, you know, I've been on 2 committees that have done policies in 2 different institutions. And I was the one sitting there as, as a staff member, frustrated beyond repair.
Yeah.
Because I lingered for 3 years and did this. And, you work on this policy, for me, and to be honest, it's the only reason why I took on the job as the equities, because I said I want my job description to make this policy a living, breathing document. That was my goal. Because I was one of those frustrated people who sat on the committee. I provided my voice, I gave a lot of feedback. We cheered and hurrah when we had it adopted, and then it sat there for 3 years.
Right.
And I was sitting there as a staff member trying to enact things, and it just lingered. And so for me, it's a balance. I think you can have strong statements, but they have to be actionable.
Yeah,
right?
Totally.
What I don't want to do is create something that's going to paralyze people.
right.
I want something that's going to be motivate and get people like, yeah, this is it.
Yeah.
I do think anti-racist policy statement can do that.
Yeah, I agree.
I think they can. But I also have been, I want to make sure we do this. We're going to do something.
Yeah, I think that was one of my biggest things too. There was some desire to put anti-racist in our strategic plan, and I just didn't feel ready. Because I didn't feel like we had some concrete action. So I wonder if there are like action statements that we can have within our anti-racist policy that then we're, both committing to the awareness and the dismantling of, and here's X, Y, and Z about how we are gonna do that, try to do that. No, not necessarily the procedure go to the policy, I think it needs to be in here. I think maybe, just something, actionable, and even if it was like, kind of going back to like, what does our board stand for? Like, if it's like, these are the, I can't just say 5 things, but, I think there's a lot of times when we think about like board priorities, we just have these really large lists of things.
Right.
And it makes it really hard then, I think, to actually really point to, because if you ask any one of us, we're all gonna say we have very different priorities. So how can we really hone in to what this is, and then everything else is gonna hopefully come center to that. So that's I guess what I see,
Mhm.
and then Terry's statement kind of means as well.
I'm so glad that you say that because
Sorry, she's reaching,
Teeing
so
it up for you
that's
all day long today.
you are on point. I'm taking you with me everywhere.
for the
So
record, we've been doing this for like 15 years.
It's
You
true.
know, so you have been.
it's true. I have you. You're right. I'm sorry. I have some.
Just sit in the corner and just like,
Already have someone, how dare I? But the question is, so what actions will you take? And so I think this is a great place for us to sort of have you have a brainstorming around that for the next, my lord, the time just really, okay. So about 15 minutes of brainstorming, because the reality is, I think you should make the statement, whatever you want to make the statement. I wanted to sort of push that. Even as I was doing work with the district, it took them so long to even get to that, and that was part of their George Floyd policy, by the way. So that's how, I mean, they did the best thing. It was really difficult for them to even come that far. And to your point, Constance, then it was like, well, we're gonna give this to the race and equity people to do. That's what they did with that policy, and it's just been languishing.
Right.
But it was a lot of pushback after George Floyd. So then they came up with all this stuff, no support, no, infrastructure, and then they gave it to a small group of folks of color, and that's how that ended. But I use that because I'm like, well, where do we start? Which is what people always ask me. So I think we start with, you can either start with your actions and let the actions craft your policy, which is our number one way that we like to do it. Or you can be like, we're gonna create a policy and then we're gonna look at the actions. But either way, this is your work over the next little bit. And in alignment with your strategic plan and the triangle. Have you shared the triangle?
I have not shared, but I'm sharing it with them at the kickoff.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'll leave you guys to wonder about the
But I'm
triangle.
excited, right? The alignment of the strat plan with this, and we work in the school improvement plan process.
But it's particularly beautiful for me because I consider those bottom to the anchors to get to this, to the school improvement plan, so. And so then therefore, this policy undergirds all that work, so it's a triangle on top of a garden. Where the,
Right?
I like to see like green too.
I'm really in that. The triangle is on top of the garden and the seeds that we're planting have to be the policies that we're gonna water. I just made that up.
Look at
Nicely
you.
done.
She can write it.
So now you need grass underneath there. Yeah.
And there's gotta be growing stuff. It's gonna be so good.
Carrots.
I'm mad it was carrots that came up. So of course, originally you guys were gonna be in small groups, but the whole group, like, what are some of the actions that we just really want to do? And that informs your policy. Do we have chart paper? Maybe we should take notes.
Yeah.
We'll just take notes.
Right.
He's not a fan of the chart paper. Well, he's like, then we're gonna have to take notes after the chart paper. I
Right,
know,
exactly.
I'm so old school. I love a good chart. I
I think
I do too. I also have a whiteboard. I like a lot of visuals in my new office.
I can't wait to
The
see
office
it. I
is
can't
done.
wait to see it. I can't wait to see it.
So do you want time to like?
Brainstorm time.
Yes, let's have a little brainstorm time, maybe 3 minutes. Like,
Yeah.
individually, and then we can come up. I don't like non-differentiated instruction techniques.
I know.
guess I should be thinking about that too.
Mhm.
Yeah, what connection is it gonna take? Hmm. Do we need another minute? Still thinking? I see copious notes and writing and, okay, let's do another minute. Yeah, fine.
No, no, it's apparently.
One more minute and then, let's see what we can break out. Oh, okay, oh, we're ready. Let's see, what are some action steps? And we need to collect this brainstorm. So do you want to add it to the slide deck?
Yeah, we can just,
And then you guys can have it.
and what, and then almost everybody can type up on that.
This meeting's also recorded, so we can easily go back and see them.
Okay,
That is maybe an and.
however, like whatever works best. Is it at both end?
Yeah.
Okay, no one was saying that, so I was like, what are we doing?
Slide 21 I just created where we can actually just be typing in some things too. I could have done a Padlet, but I didn't.
Okay, I'm gonna ask a question I probably should have asked before. So when we think about anti-racist actions. Perhaps, because I think where I wrote down is some things that may be more decenter whiteness
Mhm.
versus active anti-racist practice. So could you perhaps give me an example of an anti-racist practice?
I wanted to leave it as super broad as possible.
Okay.
Because I don't think there's anything that we're gonna come up with where I'm gonna be like, that ain't anti-racist. Like, I think that, it's a spectrum, a wide spectrum of things, and what we really are about doing is, I'm sorry, what we're really about doing is figuring out how we can create better structures. So I don't think there's a right or wrong, in other words. Who wants to?
I have a million things, but. Oh, well, let's change that. Oh, yeah, you're right. Let's change that.
Apologies.
Thank you for that.
Kept it like, where the only.
If you refresh it, you might need, yeah, refresh it and then slide 21. Thank you for that.
One of the first things I wrote down was like, naming things as I see them. So white norms when they're showing up, anti-blackness when it's showing up. I think particularly as it relates to being a white board overseeing a non-white superintendent, you know, being really honest and open about the power dynamics that are inherent in that, the ways in which power reinforces white norms. So I think just doing a lot of acknowledging those things in private and in public.
Mhm. Yeah, y'all have editing, but I know you don't have a thing in front of you, but feel free to edit anything I write up here.
I don't think this is the right word, but I put it being critical about like just business going on as usual. And I see it's like, for example, we get similar reports at every single board meeting. But how are we really looking at those and almost challenging in a way?
Mhm.
Just being critical or challenging business as usual. So,
On the status quo.
yeah.
Mhm.
So you talked about, things that we have in place. So we've had something in place for quite a long time called the Race and Equity Toolkit.
Mhm.
Is what's supposed to be used to, provide a lens into essentially all the work that we do, whether it's, technology plans, curriculum adoptions, evaluating test scores, everything that we do. And from a racial, race perspective. And my observation has been over the years that we really, people, as we've mentioned before, people don't want to talk about race. And so the analysis that gets done tends to be around looking at it from everything except race. So people want to talk about special education, people want to talk about MLL learners, all that kind of stuff. But we rarely get, a good solid analysis of race. And what the Race and Equity Toolkit calls for is to, find those racial disproportionalities and, the races that are not being well served by the system. And then, go talk to the folks in those groups, students, families, whatever, and find out, what's going on, why isn't this system working for you, and then develop some plans. And I don't think, to my knowledge, we've ever really done that properly. I mean, we have the toolkits in place, but like I say, so often, we just don't want to go race. And we know we have, the racial gaps, the achievement gaps that everybody else has in our district. And so, anyway, for me, that's kind of a big gap, because that, if we actually started doing that in every one of our processes, then, that would be more than just kind of saying some high level statement. That would be actually, implementing it on the day-to-day processes of the way the district works. And we haven't had a curriculum adoptions for a number of years, but, so often the racial cultural appropriateness, was kind of a checkbox. And I don't think anybody really looked at it in any great depth. So anyway, actually, yeah, re-engaging the Race and Equity Toolkit and actually using it all the time, and really being thoughtful and critical about how it's used, and then actually developing plans from that, I think would be a great step.
We did hear a lot about the Race and Equity Toolkit, Director Larson, and the overarching feeling from central office employees, you are correct, is that it was not being used. And this is way back when Ted was the chief academic officer, and really was like, not only has it not been used, but not really even sure how to use it. So I agree when I said, like, let's look at what has already been there. I agree to start there would be great. See where it is, see what the, we looked at it, we made some recommendations. Not a lot happened as a result of those recommendations.
Can I see them?
The recommendations? Yeah, I can send them to you if I can find them. That was 2 years ago. Yeah.
If you
but-
can't find them, Aaron heard, possibly have.
I
Or were they
think
just
we
given to
gave
the
them,
admin team?
I think they were given to the admin team, because that's the folks to whom we were reporting at that time. But happy to dig those up or look those over again. The thing is, the toolkit in and of itself is a great tool. See what I did there? But it's all in implementation. And what the central office, now, we did not talk with this amongst the equity leads. But we did talk to central office and site leads, and the feedback overarchingly was, we don't really know how to implement this.
Right.
So I agree, starting there is a great start, especially with the work we're gonna do with the equity leads. In my opinion, the equity leads should be the people at the sites who know how to implement the toolkit. Central office, however, and there were two people who were very, very vocal, like, we're not really sure what this has to do with us, we're not sure how to implement it.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of work that needs to happen with that, but you would know that.
Yeah, that happens everywhere.
Yeah, absolutely. This
Totally
is not-
unique.
Yeah, I find that really,
Not for people, but positions.
No, absolutely. I'm sorry, what, Director Larson?
I find that really interesting that people are saying they don't. I mean, when I read it, it's pretty straightforward. but you gotta do it.
Well,
Have to be willing to talk about the racial imbalances. And so it's always seemed to me that, people just don't want to talk about that.
One suggestion might be that it's always about implementing and putting in, and for example, making it a board requirement. For anything that gets in front of the board as a new action item, anything, that there has to be an equity analysis to use.
I mean.
Well,
It's written into our policy actually,
Is it?
about the equity, the.
Well, then
they
it's
use.
our job to make sure that it's included in so it's just about a matter of putting it in, right, and making sure. And as long, so I'm just saying that, and then how is the discipline of the board to say, because we've done it on other things, well, this presentation is paused until an equity analysis is, you know what I'm saying? Like, there's a couple checks and balances in implementation. Because so we need to make sure that all the board reports and everything that it's included, right? So the PowerPoint, so that, like all of those line items, like it's embedded or in the memo or whatever that needs to happen. And then the accountability at the dais. We don't see equity analysis tool here used. So what happened? I mean, and calling that out. So, okay, you can pause this, or if it was, it's timely, right? But I just think some discipline, right? And then also me having discipline with the team before they present. So just little things like that.
I also think there was a sense that it was an older policy. And I guess folks, after, it hadn't been implemented for a while, I guess folks were like, well, we can dust that off again, right? So I think this is a great time to look at it again, refresh,
Right.
bring it up. I have a lot of ideas like you, Kansi. I remember asking pointedly, like, where is, because I'm trying to word this correctly, like, where was the level of accountability at our site leaders for implementing it? And this is recorded, so I'm just gonna say that I asked that question. That's what
I would just,
smarter.
there was substantial transition.
I really appreciate you saying that, but there was also like,
I know.
yeah, okay.
I was just,
Part of the last year, we don't know how to use it.
right,
So that's my wonders and what needs to happen to support.
Right. that's right.
Because, that is also training people,
Right,
going through a process,
Yeah, I think it's training. I think it's interesting about equity work and, people, I don't know how to do that. I don't feel equipped. I can't do it. That's, ultimately it turns into like
Right.
an
Yeah.
excuse to not do the work.
absolutely.
Okay, so let's come, looks like. Yeah. Okay, so it's come up for me and I'm hoping that maybe I can help you reframe this a little bit. So I'm such a millennial in some ways where I'm like, actually this might be a little bit agency, but it's like, okay, so we all know, right, that. It's like trying to put a square peg into a round hole, right, is what we're really trying to do here. Where I'm just like. Not actually, but it's just, how do we just throw it all and start over, right? So I know that that's not reasonable.
That's what Christopher Canal said, yeah.
I
That's what he
got you.
always says.
So, and and that comes with a lot of things, right?
Mhm.
Think about our partnership with the police department, for
Right.
instance, right?
Right.
So how do I both challenge that, recognizing that we actually, we probably couldn't do business if we wiped it up out? But at the same time, what is a reasonable scaling back to scale back to a point that says we're gonna go back to the bare minimum so that we can rebuild as best we can?
Right.
Just right, that's
Let's wait till it's not recording.
okay, that's yeah. no.
Yep.
It's, so whenever someone says, let's just throw it all out and rebuild it again, I think about what happens in the interim.
Right.
Yeah.
So
You gotta have to replace it.
yeah,
Immediately.
I just can't stop educating children while we're trying to figure out how to dismantle white supremacy. And I think it's a great opportunity to figure out in our strategic planning, because we can't do everything. And I caution against okay, we're gonna solve all the world's problems right here in Tukwila. What I think is a lot more realistic is that the strategic plan lays out 3, let's say, or 4 really strong focus areas. And then we have the pieces to undergird that. And that's why I was talking about, we're gonna have this grass that we're gonna, the seeds of it. What we want ultimately is, 2 or 3 years working on something that's 400 plus years is, that's, you can see that that's an imbalance. But if I can set it up so that the next group that comes in 2 years post is like, oh, we can take this and run with it, then I feel like this is how we continue to dismantle.
Right.
And that is not to say that we don't do anything now. I'm saying this is a critical piece. There's been some work. What are the steps we're gonna take for the next little piece of work? And how do we leave the next work that we may not even hold? How do we leave that for the next group of people so that their burden can be lighter as they carry it forward? So I don't ever want to think that we haven't done anything.
Right.
I'm sure there have been wonderful people educated in Tukwila School District, but how do we take where we are now? I think Director Larson called out one thing. I think the equity leads would probably say they've been doing some work. And so how do we take what the equity leads are doing and further undergird them? And make sure that they're supported well enough to do the work. I think our principals are gonna say, many of them, that they feel like they've been doing some work. How do we push them to continue? Right, so I'm always hesitant. I'm not as radical as y'all are, where we're like, throw it all away. I'm more like, let's be surgical. I like these 3 things that are happening, but these 2 things over here. Yeah, right, these 2 things over here, maybe we need to do some pruning. But we want to keep these 3 and make them stronger.
So, and I want to elevate because it's almost like you wrote about this, but and some of the language that I tried to capture, I'm trying to capture what we're talking about. And number 4 is the one that I think remain, which is like, how do we collectively move toward this longer term vision, knowing that we are not going to be the people who get to that or get to experience it, right? But there is a bunch of short and midterm goals that you're naming. That's what we disrupt, right? The disruption versus the dismantling. It's like the disruption is, how do we disrupt disproportionality? That has to be disrupted. That's actually way more tangible than changing the way that we allow students to come to school or not, because there's some other kind of way of, right? Because it's like, well, all of a sudden the district doesn't have any money because they're not coming to class during seats. So, right, but you're like, well, no, but we came up with a different way of doing attendance to honor, right? Totally. And also is you're not going to make money.
Right.
So, right. So long term, that it's like, how do we conceptualize a different way of educating children? Short term, we have to make it so that there is some tangible, concrete things that are already being discussed that people are already doing, right? So you elevate those, but don't lose the longer term space. I think that if that's not mapped out, I feel like that's what gets lost because it's longer term.
Listen, I'm driving to LA, leaving from Oakland. I'm taking 5. But I've decided that getting to LA is my long-term goal, but along the way, I'm gonna stop at, Bakersfield, probably not stopping at Bakersfield, but I'm gonna stop at several other places.
You might go to
along the
Vegas,
way.
just like,
Or
Where I was born, be careful what you say about Bakersfield.
Okay, you're right, I'm sorry.
thank
I'm
you for
gonna-
protecting
I'm gonna
Bakersfield.
stop at Bakersfield, maybe I'm gonna make a side trip to Vegas, so I'll see my people. And then I'm gonna do this, but I still have my goal of getting to LA, right? But there's some benchmarks along the way that also let me know that I'm going in the right direction.
Right.
If I'm in Carmel, I'm out of luck because that's not on the way to LA, right? So I think there's ways that we can build in some of those benchmarks
Right.
and some of those pieces along the way,
Right.
but I'm still on the journey. The other thing is, I want us to avoid this notion of, and then it'll be fixed.
Completely.
So we just don't fix racism.
Yeah.
Right? And so there's gonna be goals, metrics, things that we're like, man, we really made a dent in that, right? And that's the tension of doing this work. Yeah. I'm aware that it's 6:52 and I still haven't heard from 3 of you. So Maybe we have a slide deck too, I don't know. Maybe you can make it smaller, I don't know, but. Have we not heard-
I think it's one thing, bringing students and families, students, staff and families to co-create change.
I love it.
Experience.
I love that.
And forever, it's not co-creating.
Yeah, that's why I put it first, right?
I love that.
You said
As a
students and
regular
families.
As a norm, not as a
Not as a one-off.
last one or an afterthought,
Uh-huh.
but.
What do you mean?
I was down meeting with community leaders and students to discuss what is seen as racism in our policy. Which is
And then co-create. So asking them what it is and then asking them to co-create and creating the space regularly.
regular, yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's where our downfall is. We do it, we don't communicate to them any change that we have made, if we've made any, and then it's over.
Constance, I have a dear superintendent friend who, well, she's an assistant soup who created a student of color group forum or whatever, and she has them in for pizza advisory. She calls them her student of color advisory team or something. It's really cute. They have a little title. They got some little, I don't know, some type of button or something. She feeds them pizza and stuff, and they meet with her like from 4 to 6 once a month.
Mhm.
And I said, "What are you learning?" She was like, "Girl, I know all the ins and outs." They pour all the tea,
Right.
all the tea.
The students usually.
Completely.
I was like, "What idea?" She was like, "It cost me almost nothing." She said, "I know everything going on. I know more than the site principals,
Mhm.
right? They know everything." And I was like, that is really brilliant.
And that's something we've been trying to
Right.
promote for quite a little while,
Right.
so.
So if you could get your, like, your community, like your families, but also get some students. When she told me they poured the tea, that just made me glad and happy.
Look. I was running here a couple weeks ago where and then there's a bunch of, I run all over the place, right? I was running over here and there's a couple kids smoking weed over there. And I was like, what y'all doing up on campus smoking weed? And they're like, well, it's the safest place to smoke weed.
I love that.
I felt like it was kind of a win for the district. I was like, look, you made a safe space for children.
They felt seen. They felt seen. I mean, what more do you?
I-
There
I
we
think you
go.
probably just reinforced it, I'm sorry, didn't.
No,
Yeah.
there we go.
Yeah, you can't get any better than that, actually. There's a safe space, right? So, we've done, did I miss
It's
this?
kind of cool.
Director Belichick, did I get you too? I didn't, I'm sorry.
I would just add a couple of things. I think one of the most harmful things we do to our students is the standardized testing.
Mhm.
And it's interesting because we run that through our race and equity tool, but I feel like we use the tool to justify doing the testing. And it's almost, it almost feels like that video that we just watched on slavery,
Totally.
in that it's really twisting it so that we will continue using these tests. And I think they are white supremacist at its best,
Yeah.
at its highest level, when we subject our kids to this kind of testing. So I think one of the things that I would like to see would be a deep examination of our testing system, and with the possibility of throwing it out. You know, it feels like we use the race and equity tool to justify keeping things. And I don't know that we've thrown anything out. We've put things on hold and reworked them to make it work. But it feels to me like we should be able to have that option also. And then the other thing I think we need to really work on, if we're working with race and equity, is language access. We're getting better at it, but there's still a lot of events in this district that don't have access for everybody that comes. And I think that just creates a hierarchy, or it creates a scene that says, well, your voice really isn't important. These other voices are. And that worries me. The only other thing I would say is somehow I would want to build in more storytelling. You know, we have this our ELL group at the high school, or I'm not sure what it's called now, but they do a poetry or something thing at the end of their senior year, I think, and put out a book that has some kind of poetry from their tradition or from their story or something about where they've come from. And I just don't think we have those stories told enough.
Mhm.
And it's a way of really building up our community. To have those listening sessions, to have those partnerships. I would love to see people seeing that their kids are in our schools and that they're partners with the teachers. And that doesn't happen sometimes because of language. I mean, there's just a few things here that I just think we need to focus on. So that's my thought.
Love it.
I do too, especially the notion of looking at our testing system. These are big, big, big ones. So listen, 7 options with a lot of sub lettering and
Trying to capture.
sub bullets. So if I were making next steps from here, I would definitely spend some time trying to workshop what this looks like. Then I would prioritize what this looks like, understanding we cannot do everything in 1 year. I would look at what this means in alignment with our strategic plan. I would really figure out how to re-engage the race and equity toolkit, but that's just me. And then I would start to put some things in place, right? So there's some clear next steps. And as a result of these 7, then we begin to craft our anti-racist policy. So I love that we started with actions and then you can put the verbiage around those actions, right? So I just want to say that this entire time meeting with the board has been, I know people give boards a hard time, but I feel like for the last 1.5 years, it's been really good to meet with you, to learn with you, to spend some time. Yeah, I just really thoroughly enjoyed it. I know we had a lot of different changes that went on in the midst of it, but I thoroughly enjoyed that. I think there's a quote that I would like somebody to read that's coming up. This is really good work, y'all. Okay. Somebody read that for me.
Solidarity is not the same as support. To experience solidarity, we must have community of interests, shared beliefs, and goals around which to unite. To build sisterhood, support can be occasional, can be given and just as easily withdrawn. Solidarity requires sustained, ongoing commitment.
Hooks. So I love bell hooks, and to build sisterhood could also mean to build anti-racist efforts, right? And so it's not the same as support, and that speaks to this notion of will we become co-conspirators? Who will we be in this moment? So here's some next steps for us. You're gonna have to say that next steps are we are not gonna meet. You're not gonna meet with us, but you're gonna do the work that you're gonna do. There's gonna be some new board members, and in January or February, Dr. Pedrosa has asked us to do a 2-day retreat. And I'm excited about that. Of course, I will be like, what's the menu? But after that, I will be like, yeah, let's do that. And really get down. And by that time, you will have met, you will have the strat plan. I'm hoping that you'll have finalized some things with your superintendent, and then we can move forward accordingly. All right, everybody good? Thank you. Time is well spent. Thanks so much, everybody.
Thank you. And thank you guys for being here. I know you guys have been ill. Thank you so much. So very-
Absolutely. That's a
Definitely,
lot
we
when you're
appreciate
ill.
that,
My
and-
gosh.
Wish you all speedy recovery.
Absolutely. Please get well soon.
Speaking of white norms, we have to adjourn the meeting because, you know, Robert's rules.
Yeah, absolutely.
And if I could get a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Okay.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.